Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. So you might be looking at this chart and saying, what the heck are you doing? What is with this crazy line going parabolic to the upside that you've tacked onto the Bitcoin price? What is this? Well, this is in response to some things that I've been seeing bubbling up, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Reddit. But people asking the question, could right now be similar to what we saw in 2019 with Bitcoin? So if you remember, just going back here, with Bitcoin, we had the bear market 2018, the big capitulation, sideways for a while, and then this massive explosive rally into the middle of 2019. This massive rally. And so what I was showing over there was just if you take this price action over here and just overlay it on the current price, what might that look like? So that's all that this is. And really the question that I want to answer here is this even possible? Is this even something that we could even consider could have any merit at all? So I'm not talking about is this probable, right? I'm not saying that I think this will happen or that it's likely that this will happen. The question I really want to ask is, could this happen? Is there any kind of reasonable way that we could think that this sort of thing could play out? And so that's the question I want to ask today. And the way I want to do that is with the help of our model, the Upside Downside Potential Indicator, UDPI. That's a model that's built to help us understand what is the relative amount of upside versus downside potential that's realistic. And so essentially what we can do is we can tell the UDPI, hey, what do you think about this price action? If Bitcoin did this, what would you make of that? Would that be something that you see as highly implausible, highly unlikely that that could ever happen? Or is it within the realm of plausibility? That's what I want to talk about here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some charts so that we can talk about that. So here's the long-term version of the UDPI, because it moves that play out over months to multiple months. If you've been watching the channel, you're very familiar with this model. So, basically when you're getting to these tops, these topping points in Bitcoin, the UDPI will get really high, telling you the upside potential is getting largely exhausted and that there's a lot more downside potential that is left, which then ultimately oftentimes will lead to that downside potential being realized. And then vice versa, when you're at these lows, tends to tell you that there's a lot more upside potential that's realistic than downside. And then, historically speaking, you'll end up being more likely to go ahead and realize a lot of that upside. So currently we are down at one of those points. It's currently about negative 2.5-ish on the long-term UDPI. So we are at one of those low levels. What would it think though if we just basically pretend that 2019 happens again? So what I've done is I've added the 2019 price action, what I was just showing you over on TradingView, to this chart here. And we're going to see is what would the UDPI level be should that happen. So if we went and did the exact same thing that we did in 2019 here, what would the UDPI say about that? So let's go ahead and reveal that part of the chart. And this is what it would be at basically. So if we basically did a repeat of that 2019, basically if you just take that price action as I was showing you on TradingView, and you just plug it in here, that's what this is showing here, then this is what the UDPI would say. So you'd be looking at a long-term UDPI rating of a little bit, of basically just under 3. So just under 3 on the long-term UDPI. And the capping out price for Bitcoin, if it did that exact same thing again, would be about 53.5K. And so you'd be looking at a pretty high long-term UDPI level should that happen. Pretty far overextension. And then, you can make what you will of that. But essentially what it's getting at, what I am kind of interpreting of this as, is that at 2019, it would get Bitcoin quite overextended, but it's within the realm of plausibility, right? If the UDPI estimates that there's, this amount of upside potential that's realistic, sure, we eat up a lot of that, probably most of it, but it's still within the realm of what it would think as being feasible for Bitcoin. Now, it wouldn't see it being able to go much higher than that probably here. It's already getting quite overextended up here, but it is within the realm of possibility. So again, this is not answering the question of likelihood, of saying that this is likely to happen, but it's saying from the UDPI's perspective, this is a possible scenario. You're within its realm of what it thinks is possible from its estimates of what is possible in terms of realizing upside potential relative to the amount of downside potential that exists. And this is the case not just for the long-term version, but if you also look at the medium term, which gives it moves that play over weeks to months, it would tap out here actually a bit lower at about 2, going up to this level in the same way that it did in 2019. And the short-term UDPI as well, it would tap out get to this highest reading about 2.5, actually cool off in this kind of consolidation period here, and then start moving back up into this ultimate move to that potential top. So it's possible. Now let's just talk a little bit about likelihood, and this is where I'm just going to get more subjective, because the UDPI isn't going to be telling us, is this likely to happen? Just saying, is this plausible? Is it possible that this could happen? For me personally, I would see this as being quite unlikely, and the reason for it is, we just look historically speaking, it's quite rare for the UDPI to ever be able to get up to around 3 in anything but a bull market, or leading up into the all-time high. You can see that really you didn't even get to 3 back over here in that first run up in 2013. You only did at that second push up over here, getting up above 4. Same thing over here, same thing over here. And so should we be pushing up this high, you know, unless we are going to go and set a new all-time high, which I do not think is likely at all. I would be unbelievably doubtful that if this turned into a broader run, what we started to see here, that we'd go and set a new all-time high from there. I think it's way too early for that to be possible. I think the macro environment is still way too uncertain and bearish. I think there's still way too many wounds left from the FTX collapse, to say nothing of 3 Arrows and Terra before that. I just think it's highly unlikely that we're going to be setting in a new all-time high within the next, you know, this would be the next 3 months, basically, we'd be saying that we'd be going up and doing that, 3 to 6 months or whatever. I just think that's very unlikely. So then if you're asking the question, you know, okay, but what if this is just, you know, one of these intermediate rallies, which we have seen in the past? Well, if we're looking at those as an analog, those tapped out at somewhere around 2, maybe a little bit higher, but somewhere around here. And this would probably just be a little bit more overextension than I think would be likely at this point for Bitcoin. So a scenario that I did also look at that I thought might just be also interesting to consider is if I just take this price action here, but just squish it a little bit, instead of letting it go all the way up to 53K, which would be pretty extreme, right? You're only about 15K off of the all-time high at that point. What would be the case if we only rallied up to about 43K? So kind of more or less the point that we hit, you know, at some of these resistance zones kind of back here in the past. What would happen if we petered out at around that level? Well, that looks a lot more possible or realistic. You know, should we go on some extended rally, maybe that this level would act as kind of the topping out point, because you'd be again in the ballpark of some of these previous runs that we've seen should we get up to those points. And so that would be what I would think is being more likely, that if we did go and see something like 2019, I don't think it would be a literal copy of it in terms of the amount of returns we would see, in this case getting us all the way back up to 53K. I think we'd probably top out at a lower point, then probably do something more like 2019 where we'd come back down, have to test one of these lower levels again, turn into support before finally being able to go and into that final kind of bull run further down the line, you know, more time having passed by the time we get there. But then if we really just think about this in terms of the overall probabilities, I personally don't think that this is even the most likely thing to happen here. I think this is an unlikely scenario. There is a possibility of it, but I don't think it's the most likely scenario. Now, I made a video before this Bitcoin rally even really started. I'm going to remove this drawing here, you know, all the way back down here on the 8th, where I was basically saying that I thought that this level that we're at right now, the kind of 19 to 20, 21, 22K range, was probably going to act as some pretty decent resistance, because there's a lot of cost basis that got accrued back here that then saw the bottom fall out, that probably might have scared some of those people who bought over here, where maybe they're taking the opportunity now to get out at break even and not risk further downside. So it's not to say that we can't go and do another 2019, but it's not my base case. And especially when we're seeing things like the stock market having trouble more recently. To pull that up, here's the S&P 500. We got rejected off of this downward sloping resistance, and we've kind of come off of that. You know, NASDAQ falling, Dow Jones falling pretty considerably. Unless that can really reverse and the stock market can start pushing back up, and especially I'd like to see the S&P 500 break out of this descending resistance to maybe set a more bullish tone. Unless we start seeing some of those things develop, it's really hard for me to see Bitcoin just going off and on this 2019 major rally on its own. I just don't think that that's very realistic. And so for me to think that that scenario becomes more realistic, I'd like to see some of those other factors start to change. I'd like to see a more bullish stock market, or something that at least looks like we could see a rally that can sustain for multiple months. That's ultimately what would be required for Bitcoin to go that high. Multiple months of bullish, broader conditions that allows the asset to really move back to the upside. And that's, I think it's just too early to say with any confidence that that is going to happen. I think we're too early, and I think the possibility of this acting as resistance, maybe even leading to a rejection back down lower, is still too high to really be getting out there and saying, oh, 2019 coming back in again, like I've seen some other people talking about. So obviously that's not financial advice. You should form your own opinions. If you think this is a repeat of 2019, you have your own reasons. Be curious to hear about them in the comments. More power to you if that's what you think is going to happen. But that's not my base case. My personal base case is not that that's going to happen. But this is an interesting exercise, because what I like about this is that we can use tools that we have, like the UDPI, to gauge what would that look like if Bitcoin did that kind of a thing. Is it within the range of possibility from the model's perspective, or plausibility from its perspective? And then we can start thinking about relative plausibility, and then refining even more to say, maybe we don't do the exact same thing 2019 did, but if we did something similar, maybe where would we be looking for as a reasonable place? And that's kind of an interesting exercise that I just thought I would share. All right, if you like content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there.